About 4 years ago, I created my favorite planted tank ever, the Hobbit tank. This is the very first planted tank that I ever made. This is the tank that started my passion for my entire aquatic hobby. I had a vision for this tank, and that vision included me making from scratch all of my own decorations. So I sculpted and I painted and I made all of my own decorations to fit the tank perfectly. Because it was my first time working with aquatic plants, it took me a really long time to get this tank right and to get the plants looking how I wanted them to. It took years, mostly because I kept killing off all of my plants. I had a lot to learn. I love this tank. It's brought me so much joy, so much happiness looking at it and pruning it and being the gardener for it. And I really thoroughly love this planted tank. But lately, I've been feeling the need for a change. I feel like it's time for me to move on to the next project. And for me, that means retiring the Hobbit tank, breaking it down, and starting from scratch. I want to use everything that I've learned from this experience and apply it to my next project, which is also going to be really cool. Especially what I've learned about making decorations. I've learned a lot since making this Hobbit tank. So I made this decision a few months ago that I was going to retire and disassemble the Hobbit tank. And I procrastinated on it. This tank was beautiful once, and then I let it go for months and months and months because I kept telling myself like, oh gosh, I'm gonna do it this weekend. I'm gonna break it down next weekend, and I never did. So now it looks like this. Not proud of letting it become this crazy mess. This is the most overgrown tank that I've ever seen, and it's all my fault. I'll fully admit that I just stopped taking care of this tank, and this is what happened. It's an unrecognizable blob of plants. So tonight, I'm finally gonna start taking apart this tank. I'm gonna start just by removing as many plants as I can for relocation, and then just slowly taking it apart step by step, and that way I can show you how I originally made the Hobbit tank and how I kind of pieced everything together and how I got that tree in there. And I just thought I'd make an interesting video on how I made the Hobbit tank, but like a deconstruction of it. So let's get to it. Tonight, I have the goal of just getting all the plants out, or as many plants as I can, because it's getting kind of late. Like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do everything tonight, but let's get started. It's pretty obvious that this tank looks really terrible. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prune a whole lot of moss out of this. So there was a moss tree that I made, big old beautiful tree on top of Bag End. And the moss I used is mini Christmas moss. Mini Christmas moss is a really beautiful aquatic moss. It's really thick and dense and bushy, and it looks really nice when you put it like on an underwater tree. But now it's pretty much completely overgrown the whole tank. It's shadowing all the plants underneath it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just remove a ton of moss. Snip, snip. There's so much moss in here, it's just crazy. So I'm just gonna start grabbing clumps and kind of snipping it with some little scissors. Oh gosh, I just yanked a huge bunch off. I had it attached to the tree, but it's overgrown enough to where that bottom layer's died off. I'm just pulling it out. Holy cow. I just yanked out like some of the topmost bunches. This isn't even all the moss. And just look at how filthy it made the tank. So moss is really good at hiding lots of detritus inside of it. So moving moss around can kind of make your tank absolutely filthy. This is insane. Another huge clump. Look at how much mini Christmas moss I just pulled out of this tank. Look at this! I've never seen this much like aquatic moss in one place. That is crazy, and it's like condensed. It's like packed down. Look at it compared to the size of my head. Just look. What am I gonna do with all of this? I had no idea it was this much. Okay, got that out of my system. This is really cool. Now I'm gonna take out a bunch of parrot's feather that I have in here. Parrot's feather is a really nice stem plant. It's bright green, it grows really fast, it's fluffy looking, and there's a lot of it. It's gonna take me a while just to get over how much moss that was. You'll see this very fluffy looking stem plant. The tank doesn't look good right now. Getting rid of that moss really stirred up a ton of mulm and gross stuff. Okay, this is absolutely disgustingly filthy. Now that I'm starting to clear some plants out, it's getting brighter in there. You can see kind of the old Hobbit look coming back, except for not. You know what I mean? I'm just gonna let the water clear for a bit. The filter's running right now, and then I'll move on to the next plants. The parrot's feather harvest wasn't quite as impressive as the mini Christmas moss harvest, but that's still a pretty good amount right there. Plus it grows so fast. So the whole time I've been filming so far, I guess my kid has left a bunch of messy sunscreen handprints all over the glass. How did I not notice that? This tank is just so monstrously filthy that I can't even really work in it, because every time I like put my hands in and I start to do something, it just becomes brown with moss gunk. It's late, I'm getting tired, I'm cranky, my feet hurt. I happen to be a big fat pregnant lady right now, so I am gonna be done with this for the night. And I'll just have to come back to it tomorrow. No big deal. This will be a multi-day project, I guess. It's the next day right now. Everything's kind of cleared up, and so I have a little bit more time tonight. I'm gonna go ahead and take all of my Anubias out. There's a lot of Anubias nana. I have some Anubias pangolino. I have some really cool Anubias stardust in there. I'm gonna go fish it all out and see exactly how much I have. Now I'm gonna take some time to yank out all of my crypts. I have a whole lot of crypt parva in here. Now it's time to take the substrate out of this tank. Yeah, it's another day has passed. It takes me so long to get stuff done. I think I'm just gonna use the method where I use a hose to suck it all out into some buckets. We'll see how this works. Now that I've removed a whole lot of the plants, you can kind of see the underlying structure. I built it, it's basically like tiered layers. So I have a little bit of substrate down here on the bottom in front of the sculpted rock wall, and then the substrate's layered behind this big wall, and then like layered again behind that little wall, just to give a sense of depth to make use of the vertical space. I like the layered look a lot. Bilbo's house back there, behind that, it's more substrate. And then I stuck a tree into it. This is a pretty easy way to remove substrate, like especially fine substrate. But if there's chunky stuff, that'll kind of mess everything up. This is a really fine substrate I used. I'm pretty sure I used fluorite. Yeah, I wanted a really fine looking substrate, so that way it would make the scale of my tank seem bigger. So this piece of manzanita I just kind of stuck down into the substrate, really deep into this back part here. And that's the only thing that was holding this tree up. So now I'm just gonna use a cup and I'm gonna scoop all this stuff out of the back end here. But you can see down here what I used to make a whole bunch of the bulk of this tank is that I actually took some like nylon stockings and filled them up with gravel or hydroton, which is like a expanded clay pellet. It's really lightweight. I use this as a way to build up and not just have to use heavy, expensive substrate, and it worked out pretty well. Well, it's done. The Hobbit tank is officially dismantled, representing 4 years of having a beautiful little tank. It's a little bittersweet. I mean, I put a lot of work into making all of these little decorations, and my husband loved it. It was for his Christmas present. That's the whole reason I even made this Hobbit tank. This was as a gift to my husband, who's a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I really wanted to try making a Lord of the Rings themed fish tank, and I did it. You know, that's something I do. I think about like this weird project I want to try, and I just go all out. And this was me going all out. Let's take an up-close look at these decorations that I've made. The parts of Bag End that were like a building, I built them flat and had some little wire bits poking out of the sculpture itself. And that's because if you looked at how I had that little hill set up, my idea was that I was just going to hook the little wire piece like over the hill, and that's what was going to keep it there. And it worked clumsily. I made a little armature of cardboard, I think, and wire under all of these little sculptures, and I sculpted on top of them. This is the front of Bag End. This was fun to do. I really liked this part. These shingles took a long time to do. But same here, I sculpted all of this from scratch and then painted it with regular acrylic paints. Then here's the very last piece, pretty much built the same way. And I ended up actually epoxying some lead weights onto the bottom of these because these floated. I was not expecting that. The fence was kind of hard to do. You can see how intricate this little fence is, but it looks really close to what the fence in the movie was. These are toothpicks. I actually used toothpicks as like the base, and then I just stuck it down into the substrate. Then there's the little gate with, of course, that great little sign. I also sculpted some little stone steps leading up to the door. And then on the bottom, I stuck little pieces of plastic to make sure that I could dig it down into the substrate if I needed to. It's like so it could hook onto something. The stone walls were probably one of the more challenging things to make. Here we can get a good look at just how much detail that it took to sculpt these. I made each rock individually. I added texture to it. I tried to make it look like just a cool old stone wall, and it worked. I don't know why this kind of got stained black. This might be from my fluorite substrate, but I didn't paint it black like this. It just kind of got stained in there. I think the armature for this was just like tape and wire and maybe a piece of cardboard. Then this big rock wall that was along the front, this one took me forever because look, I did each rock individually. I made it all cool. You can see that the decoration started to fail right there. And I made this to fit just perfectly into the bow front tank. I was fitting it as I was sculpting it and as I was making it and baking it. And then this was the tree that was on top of Bag End. It was just a cool stick of manzanita that I found. I got it from my local florist shop. To make the bulk of the tree, I used like this filter floss material that my local pet store had. Or I could have used sponge too. And then I glued it or I tied it to the tree so that way it was giving this illusion of just this bulk, like a bulky mass of leaves. Instead of just maybe putting moss directly onto the tree and then trying to grow it, it would have looked a lot more stringy and straggly. But this way I made it look really bulky and nice. I ended up just super gluing on the moss to start with, and then I let it grow in for a long time and kept trimming it, and eventually I just got this nice tree. So the Hobbit tank project was a ton of fun, and I learned so much about making decorations and making like a themed tank that I'm going to do it again. I'm going to start a new project that will be announced coming up soon. I think my patrons are going to know about it first because I like to treat them special. I'm going to have a fun new project coming up, a themed tank, and I'm going to document everything from the beginning to the end and document just how I do everything. So I'm going to start preparing for the next fantasy planted tank series, which I'm excited for, and I'm stoked. And as sad as saying goodbye to Hobbit Tank is, I need to move on. I need to move on. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Stay tuned for the next project. See you next time.